Imagine it's the year 2029. You're trying to log into your bank account, but the Face ID fails. You try to call your mum, but the call drops. The traffic lights outside your window are stuck on red, creating gridlock that stretches for miles. You check the news, and the headline isn't a declaration of war. It isn't a pandemic. It's a 404 error code. The nation's central AI infrastructure, the digital brain now running your power grid, your financial system, and your logistics networks, has just been remotely throttled by a foreign power. Not hacked, throttled. Why? Because your country didn't own the brain. They were renting it. Welcome to the era of sovereign AI. For the last 80 years, global superpowers measured their strength in megatons. If you had the nukes, you had a seat at the table. But the table has changed. The new uranium isn't mined from the earth. It's printed on silicon wafers by a single company in Taiwan. The new warheads aren't sitting in silos in North Dakota. They are H100 GPUs, stacked in data centers from Dubai to Shenzhen. Nations are waking up to a terrifying reality. If you rely on American Silicon Valley tech or Chinese state algorithms to run your country's future, you aren't a sovereign nation anymore. You're a client state, and the landlord can change the locks whenever they want. Today, we are going deep into the trillion-dollar arms race that nobody is talking about enough. We're going to look at the shadow markets, the geopolitical blackmail, and the sheer insanity of how governments are hoarding compute power like it's the last bottle of water in the desert. Buckle up, it's going to get dark. 1. The New Manhattan Project, the Silicon Iron Curtain. Let's start with the elephant in the room, or rather, the dragon in the room. If you want to understand why nations are panicking, you have to look at what happened on October 7th, 2022. No, I'm not talking about a military invasion. I'm talking about the day the United States government effectively declared war on China's future. The Biden administration dropped a set of export controls that were so aggressive, some geopolitical analysts called it an act of economic strangulation. The rule was simple. China is no longer allowed to buy the smartest chips in the world, specifically the high-end GPUs from Nvidia, like the A100 and the H100. Now, why does this matter to you? Because these chips are the only things capable of training the massive AI models that will define the next century. We aren't talking about playing Call of Duty at 400 frames per second here. We are talking about chips that simulate nuclear explosions, design hypersonic missiles, and model biological weapons. The US basically told China, you can have the old tech, you can have the chips that run dishwashers and mid-tier laptops, but the god-tier silicon, that stays with us. This created the concept of the Silicon Iron Curtain. But here is where the story gets wild and honestly, a little bit like a cyberpunk novel. When you ban a drug that everyone is addicted to, what happens? You create a cartel. Almost overnight, an underground GPU market exploded in Shenzhen. We're talking about legitimate electronics markets turning into speakeasies for silicon. Investigative reports from Reuters and the New York Times found that Chinese vendors were selling Nvidia H100 chips, which are banned, at 100% to 300% markup. Where were they getting them? Shell companies. Picture this. A random LLC is formed in Singapore or Malaysia. They order 500 H100s for cloud computing research. The chips get shipped legally to a warehouse in Kuala Lumpur, then quietly put on a boat, or even flown in private luggage, into mainland China. It's the 21st century version of rum running during Prohibition. But instead of Al Capone running booze, it's tech brokers moving servers. The paranoia is palpable. The US government is now so terrified of China getting these chips that they have started restricting sales to the Middle East. We'll get to them in a minute, just because they're afraid the Saudis might let the Chinese peek at the hardware. This is the first pillar of sovereign AI, fear of access. If you're a nation like France, India, or Japan, and you see the US cut off China, the second largest economy in the world, at the knees with the stroke of a pen, you start to sweat. You realize that your entire digital economy exists at the pleasure of the US Department of Commerce. So, what do? You start hoarding. You start building your own piles of chips, your own Manhattan project of compute, so that if the geopolitical winds shift, you don't freeze to death in the AI winter. Before we move to the next point, do me a favor. If you want to survive the AI apocalypse, or at least understand it, smash that subscribe button. It tells the algorithm that you prefer deep dives over cat videos, and it helps me keep the lights on when the robots take over. 2. The Petro-State pivot, trading oil for intelligence. Let's fly over to the Persian Gulf. For decades, countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia have had one trick: pull black sludge out of the ground, sell it, and buy Ferraris and fighter jets. But the sheikhs aren't stupid. They know the oil party has an expiration date. They know that in 50 years, data will be the most valuable commodity on Earth, not crude. So they are executing the most expensive pivot in human history. They are trying to turn Petro-States into Electro-States. Enter G42. If you haven't heard of G42, you need to pay attention. It is an AI holding company based in Abu Dhabi, chaired by Sheikh Tahnoon bin Zayed Al Nahyan. This guy's the national security advisor of the UAE and manages a fortune that makes Jeff Bezos look like he's working minimum wage. G42 isn't just a company, it's a national strategy. They looked at the landscape and said, we don't want to use ChatGPT, we want to own the Arabic equivalent of ChatGPT, and they did it. They built JAIS, an open-source Arabic LLM, large language model. But to build JAIS, and the models that will come after it, they needed chips, a lot of chips. Here's a fun fact for your next dinner party. In 2023 and 2024, aside from big tech companies like Microsoft and Meta, who were the biggest buyers of Nvidia chips? It wasn't European universities, it wasn't chaotic crypto miners, it was the Gulf states. They are buying GPUs by the thousands. We're talking about billions of dollars in hardware flowing into the desert. But this brings us back to the nuclear weapon analogy. The United States got nervous, very nervous. See, the UAE plays both sides. They are friends with Washington, but they also use Huawei telecommunications gear. The CIA started seeing reports that Chinese spies were getting a little too cozy with G42. The fear was that the UAE would become a data laundering hub, where China could access forbidden American tech through a backdoor in Abu Dhabi. So, what happened? A classic mafia-style sit-down. In April 2024, Microsoft announced a $1.5 billion investment in G42. On the surface, it looked like a business deal, but if you read the fine print, it was a geopolitical treaty. As part of the deal, G42 had to agree to strip out Chinese hardware from its infrastructure and effectively let Microsoft, and by extension the US government, oversee its AI safety protocols. Think about the implications of that. A sovereign nation, the UAE, had to effectively hand over the keys to its AI infrastructure to an American corporation just to keep access to the chips. The UAE traded digital sovereignty for hardware access. It's a devil's bargain. Why would they do this? Because they know that without these chips they become irrelevant. They are terrified of a future where the West and China control all the intelligence, leaving the Middle East as nothing more than a gas station for the robots. And it's not just the UAE. Saudi Arabia is doing the exact same thing with KAUST, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. They are buying thousands of H100s. They are building data centers that consume as much electricity as small cities. This highlights the second pillar of sovereign AI, energy dominance. Training a model like GPT-4 requires an insane amount of electricity. We're talking gigawatt hours. Who has cheap energy? The Gulf states. They have endless sun for solar and cheap natural gas. They are betting that in the future, compute power will be a physical product made of energy plus chips. Since they have the energy, if they hoard the chips, they become the kings of the new world. But there is a darker side to this. These monarchies aren't exactly known for their robust human rights records. What happens when you give an authoritarian regime the most powerful surveillance and predictive processing tool ever invented? Imagine an AI that can predict dissent before it happens. Imagine a pre-crime unit in Riyadh powered by a cluster of H100s. This isn't science fiction. It is the logical conclusion of sovereign AI in the hands of absolute power. So we have the US blocking access, and the Middle East buying their way in. But what about the old world? What is Europe doing while the giants fight? Well, grab a croissant, because the French are entering the chat, and they are bringing their ego with them. 3. The European dilemma. Digital colonies, or the third way? While the Middle East is buying chips with oil money, Europe is having an existential crisis. They've realized they are staring down the barrel of becoming a digital colony. Think about it. You're a French citizen. Your government data is on Microsoft Azure. Your military logistics run on Amazon AWS. Your kids are addicted to TikTok. If Washington or Beijing decides to pull the plug, Europe goes dark. Enter Emmanuel Macron and his obsession with the third way. France is refusing to go down without a fight. They are pinning their hopes on Mistral AI, a startup founded by former DeepMind and Meta researchers that is currently the pride and joy of the Élysée Palace. But here is where the story gets messy, and honestly, a little embarrassing for the sovereignty crowd. In February 2024, Mistral dropped a bombshell partnership with Microsoft, the very company France was trying to avoid depending on. Then, fast forward to June 2025, just a few months ago, and they announced another massive infrastructure deal with Nvidia. So, on one hand, French politicians are screaming about European independence. On the other hand, their national champion is getting in bed with the American giants because, frankly, they have no choice. They need the compute. The irony is thick. To build sovereign AI, Europe has to rent the shovel from the very people they are trying to dig themselves away from. Then you have the United Kingdom. Oh, the UK. Back in 2023, the British government had grand plans for a Brit GPT. They promised $1.3 billion to build a sovereign supercomputer in Edinburgh. It was going to be an exascale beast, putting Britain back on the map. Then came the election. The Labour government came in, looked at the books, and in August 2024, they cancelled the funding. Just like that. Poof. While the UAE is spending billions and France is hustling deals with Silicon Valley, the UK effectively tapped out of the hardware race before it even started. They decided it was too expensive to own the future. This highlights the third pillar of sovereign AI, the cost of entry. If you can't afford to burn $10 billion a year on hardware that will be obsolete in 18 months, you don't get to play. This is creating a caste system of nations. There are the haves, US, China, UAE, the renters, Europe, and the have-nots, everyone else. But what if you're a have-not who refuses to accept your fate? What if you're a nation that is sanctioned, hated, and cut off from the global banking system? You don't buy chips, you steal them. 4. The black market bazaar, smugglers, spies, and shell companies. This is my favourite part of the story because it feels like an episode of Breaking Bad, but instead of blue meth, they're moving H100 GPUs. We have to talk about the Huntsville connection. Just last month, in November 2025, the US Department of Justice unsealed an indictment that blew the lid off the smuggling world. 4 guys, American citizens, were charged with running a sophisticated pipeline to smuggle Nvidia chips into China. Here's how they did it. They set up a front company in Alabama, yes, Alabama, called Bitworks. They legally bought supercomputers from US vendors, claiming they were for domestic AI research. Then, they shipped the hardware to Malaysia and Thailand. Why? Because those countries didn't have the same export restrictions. Once the chips hit the ground in Southeast Asia, the paperwork was lost, the shipping labels were changed, and those H100s were on a boat to Shenzhen before the ink was dry on the customs forms. But that's just the small fish. If you want to see the real scale of this, you have to look at Russia. Vladimir Putin knows he can't win a war in the 2030s with 1980s tech, but sanctions have blocked Russia from buying high-end silicon. So they found a loophole the size of the Indian Ocean. Investigative reports from late 2024 and 2025 uncovered a company called Shreya Life Sciences. It's a pharmaceutical company in India. On paper, they sell medicine. In reality, they were shipping Dell servers loaded with Nvidia AI chips straight to Moscow. Since India hasn't sanctioned Russia, the trade was technically legal in New Delhi, even if it violated US export controls. It's a geopolitical game of whack-a-mole. The US blocks one route, 3 more open up in Turkey, Kazakhstan, or Hong Kong. And then there's North Korea. You might think, what does Kim Jong-un need AI for? Deep-faking basketball games? Think bigger. North Korea is using AI to supercharge their cyber warfare capabilities. They're training models to write malware, find zero-day vulnerabilities in Western banks, and automate the hacking of crypto wallets. And how do they pay for the chips? They steal the money using the AI they already have. It's a perfect, terrifying loop. This is the 4th pillar of sovereign AI, the asymmetric threat. A rogue state doesn't need a GPT-5 that can write poetry. They just need a specialized model that can crash the New York Stock Exchange, and they only need a few thousand GPUs to train it. So we've covered the superpowers, the renters, and the smugglers, but there is one final group we haven't talked about. The nations that are sitting on the physical resources needed to build these brains, and they are starting to realize they hold all the cards. We're heading to the jungle, real quick. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the dark side of tech, do me a massive favour. Check if you're subscribed. I'm trying to hit 100k subs before the singularity happens, and at this rate it's going to be a close race. Also, leave a comment. If you were a world leader, would you spend your nation's budget on nukes or GPUs? I'll reply to the best arguments. Alright, let's get back to it. 5. The resource hostage crisis. Nice chip you have there. We've talked about the chips, we've talked about the energy. But what are the chips made of? This is where the story turns into a hostage negotiation. You can have the best chip designers in California and the best lithography machines in the Netherlands, but if you don't have gallium and germanium, you aren't building high-end semiconductors. You're building paperweights, and guess who controls over 90% of the global supply of these two minerals? China. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, Beijing played a masterstroke of economic warfare. They instituted strict export controls on these minerals. It sent shockwaves through the supply chain. Prices spiked. Western defense contractors started sweating bullets because turns out you need gallium for radar systems and spy satellites. Now, as of late 2025, China has technically suspended the ban for certain partners until November 2026. They hit the pause button. But don't let that fool you. This isn't peace, it's a demonstration. They basically put a loaded gun on the table and said, we can pull the trigger whenever we want. It's a reminder that while the US controls the intellectual property, China controls the physical reality. This has triggered a desperate scavenger hunt. You have Western mining companies tearing up the ground in Australia, Vietnam, and even looking at Greenland trying to break China's chokehold. But mines take 10 years to come online. An export ban takes 10 minutes to sign. This is the fifth pillar of sovereign AI, material vulnerability. If you're a nation engaging in this arms race, you need to secure your supply chain down to the atomic level. If you don't, your AI revolution could be halted by a customs agent in Shanghai. 6. The kill switch. Protocol, the silicon suicide vest. Now let's talk about the most dangerous place on Earth, Taiwan. We all know the geopolitical tension. China claims Taiwan. The US backs Taiwan. But why? Is it about democracy? History? Sure. But mostly it's about TSMC. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company produces 90% of the world's advanced chips. If those factories stop running, the global economy crashes instantly. We're talking about a depression that would make 1929 look like a mild recession. So, what is the contingency plan? It's called the kill switch. In May 2024, and reaffirmed in leaks throughout 2025, it was revealed that ASML, the Dutch company that makes the machines TSMC uses, has the ability to remotely disable their equipment. Think about that. The most expensive complex machines in human history, costing $300 million each, have a self-destruct button. The idea is simple. If China invades, the West pushes a button in the Netherlands, and the factories in Taiwan turn into bricks. It's a scorched earth policy for the digital age. This changes the calculus of war. It means that if China takes Taiwan by force, they capture the land, but they lose the prize. They get the factories, but not the capability. This is the sixth pillar, the denial strategy. It's the ultimate, if I can't have it, no one can. And it is the only thing currently keeping the peace, but it creates a terrifying fragility. One cyber attack, one glitch, one false alarm, and the world's compute power could vanish overnight. 7. The Digital Iron Dome. Data sovereignty. While the hardware war is raging, a quieter, perhaps more insidious war is happening over the software and the data. Data is the fuel for these AI engines. For a long time, the internet was a free-for-all. American companies scraped data from French websites. Chinese apps collected data on American teenagers, and nobody really cared. That era is over. Welcome to data nationalism. Countries are starting to treat their citizens' data like uranium. You don't just let people take it out of the country. Look at DeepSeek. This is a Chinese AI lab that has been making waves in 2025. It's powerful, it's cheap, and it's open. But try using it in Italy, Taiwan, or on an Australian government computer. You can't. Nations are banning specific models not just because they are unsafe, but because they are foreign. They don't want their citizens feeding a Chinese brain. Conversely, China has effectively created an intranet for AI. where Western models can't penetrate. We are seeing the internet fracture into the Splinternet. In the US, we have the Clean Network Initiative, trying to purge Chinese code. In Europe, the GDPR is being weaponized to stop American models from training on European data without paying. This leads to a bizarre future. An AI trained in Texas might have a completely different worldview, different history, and different scientific knowledge than an AI trained in Shanghai or Dubai. We aren't just building different computers, we are building different realities. And this brings us to the final, and perhaps most disturbing pillar of sovereign AI, the one resource you can't mine, you can't manufacture, and you can't download, the human brain. 8. The talent war. Kidnapping the Einsteins. You can buy 1 million H100s, you can build a gigawatt data center, but who's going to code the kernels? Who's going to design the architecture? There are maybe 500 people in the world who truly understand the cutting edge of large language model architecture. 500 people. That's it. And right now, there is a global bounty on their heads. I'm not talking about headhunters calling them on LinkedIn. I'm talking about state-sponsored recruitment that borders on defection. The UAE is offering golden visas and tax-free salaries in the millions. The UK is fast-tracking citizenship for AI researchers. The US is using export controls to ban US persons, citizens and green card holders, from working for Chinese chip companies. Think about that. The US government told its own citizens, quit your job in China or lose your American citizenship. Overnight, hundreds of executives and engineers resigned. It was a brain drain enforced by law. On the flip side, China is aggressively recruiting researchers from Europe and the US, offering them labs, funding, and freedom from ethical restrictions that might slow them down in the West. It is a tug-of-war for human intelligence, and if you are a smart PhD student in 2025, you are the most valuable asset on the planet. You are the new rocket scientist of the Cold War. 9. The diplomatic pivot, the drug dealer strategy. Just when you thought you understood the rules of the game, that the West blocks everything and the East smuggles everything, the rules changed. Again. As of literally this week in December 2025, the Silicon Iron Curtain has shifted. President Trump, back in the White House, just dropped a bombshell. He announced that the US would allow Nvidia to sell the H200 chip to approved customers in China. Now wait a minute. Didn't we just spend 40 minutes talking about how the US wants to strangle China's AI progress? Why would they sell them the shovels? Here is the 4D chess move, addiction control. The H200 is powerful, yes, but it's not the most powerful. Nvidia has already moved on to the Blackwell and Rubin architectures. By selling China the second best tech, the US achieves two things. 1. Revenue. American companies like Nvidia make billions of dollars, which they pump back into R&D to stay ahead. 2. Dependency. If China buys American chips, they aren't building their own. It's the classic drug dealer strategy. Keep the customer hooked on your product so they never learn to cook their own supply. It's a pivot from blockade to managed decline. The US is effectively saying, you can have AI, you just can't have better AI than us. But this is a dangerous game, because as any dealer knows, eventually the customer wants to become the boss. 10. The end game, the singularity trap. All of this, the smuggling, the mines, the politics, the billions of dollars, it's all for one thing, AGI, artificial general intelligence. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently said that to get there, we don't need 1 million GPUs, we need 100 million GPUs. He's talking about infrastructure projects that cost $1.4 trillion. That is the GDP of Spain. The theory of sovereign AGI posits that the first nation to achieve true superintelligence won't just have a slightly better economy, they will effectively have a god in a box. An AGI could invent new physics, cure all diseases, crack every encryption code on Earth, and design weapons we can't even comprehend. If the US gets it first, the American century becomes the American millennium. If China gets it first, the East rises and the West falls. If a rogue state gets it, well, game over. This is why nations are hoarding GPUs like nuclear weapons. Because unlike a nuke, which you build hoping never to use, an AI supercluster is a weapon you build intending to use every single second of every single day. We are trapping ourselves in a prisoner's dilemma. Every nation knows that rushing this technology is dangerous. We should slow down. We should coordinate. But we can't, Because if we slow down and they speed up, we lose everything. So we dig more mines, we build more power plants, we print more chips, we march forward, faster and faster, hoping that whoever wins the race is benevolent enough to save us from ourselves. Final thoughts. So, the next time you see a headline about a chip shortage, or you see your government spending billions on a data center in the middle of nowhere, don't scroll past it. That isn't just tech news. That is the sound of the new Cold War. We aren't fighting for land anymore. We aren't fighting for oil. We are fighting for the ability to think faster than our enemies. The era of sovereign AI is here, and the only question left is, who is going to hold the leash? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the terrifying future of geopolitics, you know what to do. Click that subscribe button so you don't miss the next update. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If AGI is invented, do you trust your government to control it? Or would you rather it belong to a corporation? Let the debate begin. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future.